welcome to Volteface TV. My name's Paul. I'm the director at Volteface, and I'm joined by
Katya. I'm head of operations at Volteface.
And in today's show, we're going to be talking about politics and cannabis in the UK. We're going to be exploring what is going on with politics and cannabis in the UK. We have, I don't know if they're controversial opinions, strong opinions maybe.
Yeah, hot takes maybe.
Hot takes. I hate that phrase. Hot take. And we're going to be talking about cannabis and politics in the UK and, breaking down some of the challenges that exist and why there's this, stagnation that's occurred with regards to the subject. But while you're here, please like and subscribe for more content. We've got loads more to come. Now we're in the swing of things in 2023. So do like and subscribe for more. We appreciate everyone's support. Cool. Let's get on with it then, Katya. So what do you, I think we've got a similar position on this. We'll both jump in. But, what do you think is going on with politicians in cannabis reform, or just broader drug policy reform, to be honest, in the UK at the moment?
I think that it's stagnating. They're a lot less willing to take a strong and quote unquote controversial stance on the topic. I think what we've seen with Brexit and COVID and war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis and all these things culminating, we're living in just a very chaotic,
Relaxed.
chaotic environment when it comes to politics. And I think the way in which politicians have been behaving and all of these scandals that have been coming out, month after month, I think a lot of politicians are just kind of fearing for their jobs. And there's a lack of willingness to engage in topics that are deemed to be controversial or I guess just not deemed to be directly on the news cycle.
Yeah. And we could give actual, because if we zoom out and think about the past 4 years of lobbying politicians, not just our experience, but just the sector's experience, you look at the Labour Party and
they're not that liberal.
Not that liberal, not that progressive at all on drugs. And I genuinely feel like it's just going one way. It's just going downhill. Like under Corbyn, there was. Corbyn's own son runs a hemp business, and I thought at that time I met him a few years ago, and I thought, oh, this could help. This could if Corbyn, as controversial as Corbyn was, and obviously he didn't win the election, but just having someone in the chamber, the leader of a party, owning the subject could have been good. We had David Lammy, really supportive of the issue. There was Charlie Faulkner, really supportive of the issue. There's all the MPs that agreed to join the Labour campaign for drug policy reform. Since then, Labour have just gone completely backwards. Starmer, reluctant to positively engage in the subject.
Yeah, outright negatively engaging on the subject. Yeah. And I think it was about a year ago now with the Sadiq Khan London diversion scheme chatter last year. I think that just shows why politicians are unwilling to engage on the subject as well, because what was implemented or proposed to be implemented a year ago was a very non-controversial diversion scheme for young people in a couple of boroughs in London. To divert young people away from the criminal justice system for possessing a little bit of cannabis. And that story got totally brought to it was just totally
ridiculous.
Changed.
It was we did a lecture about this the other day, didn't we? We did a talk about it in, where were we? Bath?
We're at Bristol.
Same thing.
About how the media just totally spun it out of control and out of what it was actually focused on. Time Out did they did take it down.
Time Out was unbelievable.
About speed, ketamine, and cannabis being legalized in London, which is just totally not true.
Which is wild. I don't know whether that puts people off or whether that's that is just a state of play like that. I imagine it does put people off who are progressive, but also that's that is just what the system's doing at the moment. If you speak out positively around something that isn't fitting within classic mainstream political narratives on both parties, Labour are clearly moving ideologically to a place where they can get Tory voters back on side, and cannabis feels like it's fallen into that category if one of them speaks out like Sadiq did and say, and what he said wasn't even that controversial, really. It was literally just a diversion scheme.
And he wasn't even coming out directly in support of cannabis. He was saying, look, what we're doing isn't working and it's worth looking at the evidence and, starting to do some research on what a better system could look like. So it really wasn't
It was the least controversial thing ever.
Yeah. And diversion schemes, we've spoken about this. There's lots of aspects of drug policy that are gritty and sexy, but diversion schemes really aren't one of them.
So boring. I've run them. I mean, they're fun to run, but they're, from a policy perspective, it's a bit dry.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons why politicians, like Labour in particular, but Tory as well, are afraid to speak out on the issue because they saw how something that's quite safe and not controversial got spun out of control.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. So that's Labour. Labour feel like they've sort of gone under the rocks a bit with regards to
which is interesting though, because there was that polling that was done, the Red Wall polling. Because I think one of the main kind of myths has been that Red Wall voters are more against cannabis reform or drug policy in general, and that's why
it's just untrue.
Yeah, Labour politicians aren't willing to engage in the subject, but there's polling, like literal evidence to suggest that isn't the case, but that hasn't changed anything.
Yeah, so that's frustrating. And then you go to the other side of the house, and the Tories have just not. Again, I mean, they've been in such political turmoil that I don't think, from a policy perspective, they've engaged in a great deal other than the finances. And some people have said to us, surely the Tories are primed to support cannabis reform because you can make economic arguments. You can make really good economic arguments, but making those arguments doesn't dissolve it from the morality of the issue. And moral issues are just some things that politicians just don't engage with at the moment. They just go to their safe place with regards to the issue.
Yeah, safe framing. And I mean, they've just been firefighting at this point with
completely.
All the different scandals and all the different prime ministers and ministers that we've had in the last year, something that isn't directly linked to the cost of living crisis just isn't really going to be up for debate and discussion. It's just not an agenda. And then you've got the Lib Dems, who obviously a very small party that, again, are just not talking about it, a party that have championed it. But they used to.
They used to be the main force. And I've been thinking a lot about that, like the impact of like the two-party system that we've kind of fallen into the trap of. We see it in America quite a lot. And although there's lots of diversification with regards to what happens in two-party systems, it's kind of like a them and us. It's the whole like Tories are evil, never kiss a Tory type thing. The same dynamic plays out in North America with Democrats and Republicans. But I feel like from a policy perspective, it just makes everyone really safe. Do you know what I mean? They're just kind of locked down on the areas that they're really comfortable in, that the opposition can't really attack. They've even seen it with Biden with cannabis, safe banking act. They've kind of just held their position and not done anything that opens them up to a line of attack on the other side, even though for most people on the other side of their house, they're quite supportive of it, again, through economic arguments. But it just becomes this like stagnation of the issue.
And like just polarization too.
Yeah. And I feel like our politics is just the same. It's just polarization.
But when you look at the actual like policies, like Labour and Tory really aren't that different.
Yeah, there's not. Well, Labour have purposely positioned themselves in that way, aren't they? To try and like be a safe bet. And to be fair, it's working. Like the polls are wildly in favour. Well, whether that's Labour causing that or that's just just implosions of the Tories. I don't.
Yeah, I think maybe a bit of both, but I do just think that all of the scandals and parties and law breaking that the Tories have done over the last 2 years, I think that's
last 2 days. It's literally just like a weekly thing, isn't it? Of like another scandal.
Yeah,
so that's definitely at play. The thing we've talked about a lot is that like disconnect that we feel exists between politicians and the public, and the complexity that creates with regards to policies.
And how like the media just interact with that too. Like what the media are reporting on is what politicians will be paying attention to, but that's not really in line with what people are paying attention to.
Yeah, agree. And then I think we see issues like cannabis reform that politicians perceive to be controversial, and in between the politicians and the public. We're obviously like delving into Revolt of the Public a little bit here, which I think is a great book. There's the media kind of sit in the middle and they just spin things up into the public. So, they hear a story like cannabis and they're like, whoa, here we go. How can we make this a bit more controversial and exciting? Like, how can we egg this on rather than it just being kind of a factual representation of the issue? And that then feeds a stigma a bit, doesn't it? That kind of pushes it even further.
Yeah. Yeah. It runs into, I mean, the media have their own agenda. They're always trying to spin something up around whether they're trying to anger politicians or whether they're trying to get the public riled up about something.
And this is like I don't know, this is less about cannabis and more just the state of the world, but I just find that so demoralizing as a citizen in a democracy when the political institution is no longer bothered about ideology and it's bothered about what do people think of me. Democracy is obviously a force for good and it's clearly based on the best available evidence, very sensible thing for a society to do. I mean, democracy clearly is sensible in reducing harm and living a more positive life than systems that exist outside of that. But you have to question, we didn't get to this point of a democratic institution by people in power thinking, what are people going to think? In fact, I think the opposite happened. We got to systems of democracy by people being brave and saying, do you know what? That is what I believe. And I'm gonna, it goes against popular opinion, but I believe it and I'm going to stay true to it. And be bold and brave.
Because popular opinion and evidence-based policy are different things.
They
don't always overlap.
Yeah, and that's the bit that that's at the heart of the issue, isn't it? Although I think we could probably have a long debate over what evidence is, because I've done lectures about this.
Where
people are in drug reform we should have evidence-based policy, and it's well, what do you call evidence? And they'll say evidence of
personal experience
and less harm, and it's but it becomes this whack-a-mole of where the harm is and what you're always defined by it.
Yeah, and you can always nitpick evidence and find what you're looking to find as well.
Well, evidence. What my version of evidence is just what I want to see in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I'm this is good evidence, it's
like
just,
ideology.
It's just that's how I want to see the world. In fact, you debated this recently, didn't you, of a guy at the Big Ideas?
Battle of the Ideas.
Battle of Ideas. Yeah. And there was the guy who debated went too far the other way and was I think, forget evidence, all we need is ideology.
I'm just
which is a wacky, I think that's a ropey position. I think you can have ideological perspectives that have evidence kind of assigned to them. But to just pretend that evidence isn't there and you should just go off gut instinct and feeling that feels a little bit wild. But going back to that point, that it's so frustrating that we have this system that I think is built on people being bold and brave. Yet we have politicians who are doing the absolute opposite. I can't remember the last time I thought that's brave of a politician. Do you know what I mean? Demonstrate genuine bravery.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to just the world that we're living in with social media and with everything kind of being monitored in that way. Because I think we're not just seeing populism in politics and amongst our politicians, we're seeing it more generally. And it's this politicians and public figures are trying to craft this brand and image that they use and put out online to appease their constituents and their followers, and not necessarily saying what they think, but what they think other people will like and what they think about them.
But it frustrates me that I guess, again, we're veering off the subject, but I'm not really bothered.
It's fine.
I think that's why Trump cut through with some people, because he didn't do that. He's just, I'm just gonna say what I think. I'm just gonna say what I think, and you can like it or not like it, and I'm gonna call out the nonsense. And again, I'm not going pro-Trump here. Yeah. But he called out the people doing that.
Yeah, I think it's that it makes you understand why he was able to get to that position of power. Because I think a lot of people, both in America and abroad, were just how did someone this get into power? No experience, just
Because he started doing things that politicians aren't doing. Politicians, it's all this kind of game playing. You see it week in, week out with politicians. The Sunak the other day when he was asked a bunch of questions by a Scottish reporter, he just didn't answer the question. He just kept, the guy kept asking him about what do you think about this particular issue? And instead he was I'm here, I'm listening to the people, we're very engaged. And he was yeah, no, sorry, you've not answered the question. I'm asking you it was about Scottish independence. He was what do you think about this? Well, we're here and we're listening. And he was okay, now you're just completely why are you doing it? And it was just this ridiculous exchange of him saying, Okay,
like a
so
satirical
you
comedy
are not
of,
answering
like,
my question. Why are you not answering my question? And you just say the same thing again. And Miliband's done it. Loads of them have done it before because they think, right, this is going to get clipped for a 10-second piece of news. If I just
and
say
they're
this
not going to
answer
put
over
the
and over
question
again,
before, so it's going to look fine.
Say the same thing over and over again, I'll eventually get an answer. And I think that I'm so disappointed that our political institutions globally are going in that direction, by which those morally complex subjects like cannabis, where you could think of loads of things, drug policy in general, lump them all into that same category. Instead of like having bravery, they just fall into that trap of just thinking, well, what do the people think? There are some issues, like there's the gender debate at the moment that's going on where people are taking more sides. But even then, I think there's a lot of people that are there's a fear of disengaging in a subject that provokes, you know what I mean, like a moral outcry. And then you just see them on, I don't know about you, but around that issue, you just see completely polarized opinions. There's no like middle grade. It's just like you're either completely wrong or you're absolutely right.
Yeah. When I don't think that's necessarily representative of what people are thinking. I think most people kind of sit in the middle with that. And same with cannabis, to be honest. I think, you know, you do have your loud prohibitionists, you know, very, conservative, conservative and traditional people that sit strongly on, you know, cannabis is an evil drug. And then there's people that are like super enthusiastic, super passionate, but like the grand majority of people kind of sit somewhere in the middle, and they're like, you know, well, if it's not, you know, if it's not harming me, not bothering me, I don't have to see it or interact with it. I don't really care.
I think that's the thing with most policy, though. I think social media, again, we're going back to the work of Martin Gurry in Revolt of the Public here, the way he talks about the issue.
Yeah, we need to get him on a podcast.
I'd love to get him into it. He's tweeted us a few times. Maybe we should be like, we did a podcast and talked about you watching. Come on the show. There's that, like, the way what social media does is it just creates that polarization. The people in the middle that aren't that bothered don't say anything.
Yeah, and it makes you want to engage with it, and riles you up. Yeah.
So the nuance goes, and I think you're probably right about most political issues. People are just like, what's the sensible bit in the middle? Yeah. Do you know, I don't want to legalize all drugs. People just
have their own stuff going on, and they're like, you know what, like this doesn't actually directly impact me on a day-to-day level, so I don't really mind. And I think that's why drug reform is sidelined so much, and cannabis reform is sidelined so much. You know, you've got a certain percentage of the population that has tried an illegal drug, and a certain percentage of the population that like uses illegal drugs on like a semi-regular basis. So those people might be like bothered and interested on the subject, but most people just aren't like really engaged on it, so they don't really have a stance.
No, I definitely think that's the case, and social media amplifies it, and then the politicians. Because I was speaking to someone about this the other day and about social media, and I won't say the name actually, but really well respected person, works in a think tank lobbying world, and was chatting about it, and they were making the point of like, there's just too much focus on social media. Everyone has this perception that like social media is the way of getting society's opinions and views and stuff like this, but it's a small percent. Even though like Twitter's active, most people don't tweet on Twitter every day. You know, most people don't care what's going on Twitter. They might look at it for a bit of news, but the overwhelming majority of the global population could not care less what's going on in Twitter. Other people, it is everything. You know, they're obsessed. All views on Twitter.
Constantly on Twitter. And I think that comes down to that, also something that's mentioned in the Revolt of the Public, but the total like information overload. We have so much content these days. I mean, I feel like everyone's job title now is like content creator, you know? We're creating content right now as we speak, but there's this like information overload, and you didn't used to have that, you know, a couple of decades ago. And so, but it's not like we have extra time in the day. It's not like we have more than 24 hours in a day to like process all that information even more. We're either like not processing it or just processing it so quickly it doesn't actually do much.
And that comes back to the challenge of policy with an MP. There's that much information that's thrown at them that they've got to take into consideration.
And they haven't got the time, and they're people. Like they've only got a certain amount of hours in the day and in the week and you know, they've got incredibly stressful and busy jobs. I don't envy them at all.
This thing about MPs having an easy job. I mean, like you just basically just hang around MPs for a bit. It's not easy. It's not like it's they get paid a decent amount of money for what they do, but like they could earn more.
Yeah,
I mean,
for the amount of time that you spend away from your family and the amount of time that you need to spend traveling, you should.
It's hard. I mean, there are some bad MPs.
Yeah,
there are some
bad
MPs
people.
But they're bad people. But like, oh my God, if you know.
Yeah, but I think that's another consideration around, like, especially if, you know, it's not an issue that's particularly highlighted amongst your constituents. You're not going to care about it that much because you've only gotten. I think, you know, an MP chooses a couple of core policy things that they stick to.
Yeah.
If things change, they might leave one policy and grab another. But I think getting like drug policy onto every MP's agenda is just an impossible task.
Yeah. And that, you know, some people have said to us, you know, it's all about writing to MPs, like, just if they always reply to their emails and they care about the constituents, which is true, like they do. You can raise the profile of an issue of an MP, but you often see them just falling back into the party line anyway. Like, you just get like a generic response. You know, if we
like, you know, yes, thank you very much for your email. I will be, you know, taking this up for consideration. And you think even when they do raise it, you know, someone asks a question in Parliament, you know, during PMQs, and, you know, you get a generic response like, oh yes, you know, we will be looking into this and stuff. But that doesn't, you get a little clip for social media and the MP shows that they, you know, they care about the subject and they're doing something about it, but it's not actually doing anything. It's like when, this was a while ago, this was like 2021, I think, where Boris Johnson was asked that question about psilocybin. I think Crispin Blunt asked it, and it was about like, when will psilocybin be rescheduled to Schedule 2 and look into evidence and research? And Boris Johnson was like, yes, we'll be, you know, looking into what we can do about this and everything. And everyone got so excited, like all of like drug policy Twitter and like, all of these like cannabis news outlets were like, oh my God, Boris Johnson's going to reschedule psilocybin. And like, you know, it's beginning of 2023.
He's just saying something, just saying whatever. Yeah, he's just blagging it on the spot.
It's just
like,
saying
we'll look
things
into it
to get you out of whatever situation you're in, just so you can move on and, you know, not be bothered. So
yeah, exactly. So it's disappointing. That relationship's disappointing, and we then always go back to that issue of morality, that cannabis policy does invoke strong moral reactions, which all the things we've talked about are just true of policy in general, but then cannabis in particular, or drug policy in particular, does invoke such moral reactions that it adds that additional layer of complexity. But I guess we could talk about that for a long time. I think we've like made our points. We've kind of broken down where we think the tensions sit. I guess the next logical step of the discussion is, what do we do about it? Because I think all those things, without systemic change, like Jay wrote an interesting article the other day, didn't he, about how drug reform's not going to get anywhere without proportional representation. But I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, that's just basically, it was a good article. Jay was a really good article, but you may as well just admit that politicians aren't going to reform drug policy. Yeah. Because there's absolutely no way we're having a referendum on PR. Like, it's not going to, we've already had one and it failed. So that's not going to happen. And that goes back to that issue within the modern democratic institution that we have in the UK. It's not even a numbers game. It's a constituency game. It's not like how many people are going to support this issue. It's like, who's going to support it and where are they across the country, which politicians are more interested in. Do you know what I mean? How do we secure and win those seats? So I think the chance of UK politicians, without any external factors which we can discuss changing their opinion, is incredibly low when it comes to wider drug policy reform. I just can't see. I can't see it happening. I can't see any situation. The only things that I guess could happen naturally are a Labour government coming in, which looks likely. Although I won't trust any poll and anything. You know, like Christ.
I feel like I just trust no one at this point.
Like 2 weeks is a long time for the polls to change, and most recent polling has been really wacky anyway, hasn't it? And and way off. So unless Labour get in and then they are like, right, okay, now we're in, let's be more progressive in a few areas. And some of those politicians who are placed to talk about the issue become bolder and more forward. That could happen.
I think it could happen in regards to some of the, you know, key Labour MPs that have been positive and forthcoming on the issue, but because of taking, you know, shadow ministerial roles and just the, you know, the general chaos of government at this moment, they don't want to make that a core policy. But if they were to be in government, they might do. But I think Labour would only go as far as like decriminalisation, more diversion. I can't see it suddenly flipping to adult
regulated market. Do you know what I mean? Adult use cannabis.
Yeah.
But I do think we could get there politically in other ways. So should we talk about what some of those other ways might look like? I think they're like sort of asking myself a question there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, it's because you pause for a second. I think if we step outside of the UK for a second though and think like about the globe and cannabis reform generally,
positive things going
loads of things going on, especially in Europe. You think about all those European countries.
Yeah, you've got Germany that looks like they'll be going legal, although they're kind of in the process of looking through all the policy and seeing what's possible, what's not possible. But yeah, Germany is firmly looking into, legalizing for adult use. Czech Republic is doing the same. It looks like Czech Republic will actually beat Germany in the process, I guess. Smaller country. You've got like cannabis experiments going on in Luxembourg and Switzerland and Netherlands, and expansion of the market in the US.
France is looking good. Spain's good. There's so much like progress with the issue. I think we have to we talk about that information overload. Well, we're overloaded with information on a global scale. Don't we? It's not like I only get overloaded with UK information. I get all sorts of crap.
Yeah,
from all around the world.
And so do politicians.
Yeah.
So the more, I think it's a lot about exposure and awareness. I mean, we talk about this with the medical cannabis market in the UK and the fact that 84% of the British public don't know that it's legal for medical use. That's one of the reasons why there's so few patients in the industry so small, because just not that many people know about it. And I think if we pivot and look at that in terms of like adult use progress, we'll probably see something similar as we see more countries go legal or consider policy change. That information will be fed back to UK politicians, and there'll be increasing interest.
Definitely. I think the politicians are, at the end of the day, integrated into society, and even though they sit in a unique position in terms of their numbers and power and influence, they're still
members of society.
They're still exposed to the same things we are. Yeah, and I guess our role as advocates, people that care about the subject, people that work closely with industry and support the industry, is how do we build bridges from the UK to some of those places? You know what I mean? How do we facilitate study trips, education events? How do we bring people over? APPG is particularly useful for this. The recent drug policy APPG did this, didn't they? Where they just got lots of people speaking. Although it also I think APPGs are great, but sometimes if you've just got people in the room that also care about the issue, what's the point? Like, you want people in the room who not so much don't care about the issue, but are there to be educated. Yeah. Or it's like a new thing for them. Do you know what I mean? Like, people of influence. But building bridges so that we can then say to UK politicians, look, I'm not going to pitch you any policy. Just like have a look. Just go have a look. Just go see it. And when they visit, they will naturally see that legal market anyway. So yeah, and how like boringly regulated it is. Yeah, it's too boring, I think, in a lot of places. That's the podcast for another time. Is how boring regulated, boring. Want it to look like a roller coaster candy shop. Yeah. I want Alton Towers. Yeah, I want Busch Gardens. I don't want like steel roller coaster world. But yeah, I think those bridges and maybe again, one thing we've talked about a lot is that trying to move the situations around politicians rather than politicians themselves. So working more directly with the media for more positive campaigns that politicians then see. Do you know what I mean? Trying to create social media campaigns, viral marketing campaigns, viral marketing stunts to educate the populace, to engage the populace on the issue. And that it's basically a bottom-up approach rather than being like politicians down. Yeah. And rather than being bottom-up, but not in like a advocacy, let's take to the street sense. Because the moment I think, and I learned this in drug treatment, the moment you trying to tell someone that their position's wrong, the more they double down, even if they are wrong. Yeah. Like I used to talk with heroin users who would be losing a leg, and I'd be like, you're going to lose a leg, you need to stop using heroin. I mean, I wouldn't say that because I knew it wouldn't work. Because it just makes someone feel like, what you want about? You don't understand my plight, you don't understand my challenge. And the same thing. Like cognitive dissonance. You take to the streets, if we organised 100,000 person march in London, marching about cannabis, it wouldn't make any difference. Because when people see the march, they'll be like, oh, they're mad. They're just mad. People that disagreed would say, oh, these are just mad people getting angry. You don't want to be angry. You want people to be curious and interested and excited. Do you know what I mean? And that's a different kind of advocacy, isn't it? Getting people excited. Yeah. Yeah, excited, interested in like engaging on the subject and asking questions. Whereas, I think that kind of classic campaigning
stunt stuff doesn't work very well. I mean, the stuff that like Extinction Rebellion does and like Just Stop Oil with all these stunts, it ends up polarizing people more the opposite way and just making, people, everyday commuters really angry. Yeah.
People just
even if they agree that, climate change is a problem.
Yeah. Unless you've got the media and your public on this. Because if you think about the campaigns in 2018, they got through because the public and the media were on the same side. Both were saying this is wrong. Why aren't you doing something about this politically? Like paper, it's not like they were united. Both media and public were united in pushing up at politicians. But classically, you think about Extinction Rebellion, it's not. There are some media outlets, the left-leaning media outlets, like really supportive, but the right aren't, and the public aren't behind them. The public are divided, so it just creates this like more fragmentation. So us thinking and the community thinking about how can we make people excited and curious about drug reform, rather than how can we show them that they're wrong? How can we correct their position? That feels like a more effective way of doing things. I mean, more of a bottom up approach like that.
And just like a slow burning approach as well. Like none of this stuff is going to happen overnight, and just seeing more positive news coverage around the benefits of cannabis as a medicine, the harms of our current drug policies. Like I think it's just about like planting seeds and sprouting seeds around that.
Seeds.
No pun intended.
I'm surprised there's not more, as a viral stunt thing, I'm surprised there's not more planting of seeds. Because people could just, I guess it's expensive, people could just walk and scatter all over like Westminster Park. Do you know what I mean? Like
that would be actually quite funny. Yeah.
All start sprouting. So I think there's things we can do about it. Like it's easy to get dejected, disappointed in how difficult it is engaging politicians in the subject at the moment. But I think that is just I think the people that keep trying to do it, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I also think it is just a generational thing. Like you do have to remember, like the war on drugs, it's been like 50 years of failure, or 52 years, whatever it is now. But like in the like grand scheme of history, like that's not a massive amount of time. Like that, the war on drugs was implemented when like, our parents or, grandparents were growing up. And so like that's still only like 2 generations.
Yeah.
And when you speak to like young professionals these days, most people are like quite sensible and in the middle. Or, I think my guess would be that drug use and cannabis use in general has gone up, and your average, young professional on the street has had some sort of experience with cannabis and is probably like relatively pro. Yeah. So I think that in general will also help, because I think we do forget that like politicians in general are in the more like middle-age bracket. You don't get loads of politicians that are kind of in their early 30s or under 30. So it's not necessarily representative of like what the next generation is thinking and feeling. So yeah, I think a lot of it is just that like generational thing. And as we educate the public and those people go into positions of power, things will change. It's like medical cannabis. The specialist clinicians that are currently prescribing are, in their 50s and 60s and probably quite set in their ways, don't have a great deal of experience and knowledge about cannabis. And that's why they don't want to prescribe. And so that's why like educating medical students, and medical students themselves probably just know more about cannabis anyways. Yeah. So I think that's obviously a slow burner, and we'll have to wait a bit longer for those people.
It's a reason to be hopeful though. It's a good positive way of looking at it.
Yeah.
There you go. Smashed it. There we go. That's that all explained.
UK politics and
UK
cannabis
politics explained. What we need is a completely new political system. No, we can. There's options in there. I'm excited about what we can do in the coming years on that. Options we've got available.
Good to not lose hope and just to continue doing what we're doing.
Stay positive.
Yeah. Cool.
Wicked. Thanks so much for watching the show. Do like and subscribe for more content, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.